Hi, my name is Terri Saunders. I'm the host of Treasure Expeditions. On this episode of Treasure Expeditions, I stop in to Cherokee Ranch and Castle, worth an estimated $30 million. The location of the castle and ranch may surprise you. It's not located in Europe, but it's located tucked away in a Colorado town.
Cherokee Castle is located in Sedalia, Colorado. It's about 45 minutes south of Denver. And Cherokee Ranch and Castle Foundation opens the property up to the public by reservation.
I sat down with Executive Director James Holmes, who discusses the castle's cultural events.
We provide a wide variety of options for guests to be able to experience Cherokee Ranch. At the castle, which we really treat as a house museum as well as an event center, guests can come for almost daily tours of the castle. We also offer afternoon teas. We do a number of concerts throughout the year. We have theatrical performances. We make the castle available for photo shoots and for filming opportunities. We also do quite a lot with curating the art in the castle and sometimes build programming around the art. Out on the land, we do a lot of conservation efforts, including wildlife conservation. And people can come and hike, and they can come and view the wildlife. And we like to give people opportunity a couple times a year to also see the ranch operations.
Holmes discusses the castle's collections.
My favorite room in the castle is the library. Tweet was a voracious reader and collector of books, and she had a lot of really interesting pieces, including a folio from Shakespeare. She had first editions of Winston Churchill's works. She had bought a set for each of her two sons, and a number of other rare and unique antiquarian books. And so I love to get lost in the library. We also have a lot of art. Some of the art Tweet had in her collection, I think, is work that could be in museums. And so a lot of people like to come and see the art and experience the art as well. And then I think the other attraction is the Great Hall, where most of the castle-centered events take place. The high beam ceilings and the hardwood floors, it kind of has that old world feeling, and people really love to be a part of that.
Tweet Kimball owned Cherokee Castle and Ranch.
Tweet Kimball came here in 1954. She moved to Denver from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and kind of famously made the decision to depart her native Tennessee after approaching her husband shortly after the war for a divorce. And it's said by Tweet that he gave her essentially a choice. He said that he'd be willing to accept the divorce, but she had to be willing to move west of the Mississippi. And so Tweet set out to the west to fulfill a dream she had of becoming a cattle rancher. She went to California, New Mexico, Arizona, looking around for the perfect home. And someone had mentioned to her that they had heard that there was a castle for sale in Colorado. And so Tweet came to Colorado with the vision of establishing her cattle ranch, and really had a 45-year story that unfolded of her being influential in a number of different areas in Colorado, from politics to the cultural activities in Denver. She became very much a central figure in a lot of the development of the philanthropic activities here in the Denver metro area, and also made quite a reputation for herself with the National Western Stock Show and her Santa Gertrudis cattle.
Holmes talks more about Tweet Kimball's cattle ranching.
Tweet now famously bred Santa Gertrudis cattle, and the Santa Gertrudis have a really interesting history. They were developed by the King Ranch beginning in the 1940s, actually late 30s, early 40s, and they were the first ever registered American cattle breed. In other words, the seat stock and their establishment of the breed itself happened here in the States. The King Ranch did a demonstration of these cattle at the Keeneland sale, which is actually a horse sale in Kentucky. And Tweet, being a horsewoman, her and her father were visiting Keeneland that year, and she saw the Santa Gertrudis cattle for the first time. What was really unique about the cattle is they were a crossbreed of Brahman cattle and then what's called Texas Shorthorn. And this development took place at the King Ranch, which is a historic ranch down in South Texas. What's important about that is the cattle were developed for the South Texas climate, so hot, arid conditions, and they were bred to be able to survive in that climate. So when Tweet approached the King Ranch, in 1954 with the interest of bringing those cattle to the Rocky Mountains in the winter. They didn't think they would survive here. And Tweet spent quite a lot of time in Texas meeting with different ranchers that have begun breeding these cattle, and eventually bought her first grouping, which was a bull and 25 cows. And then she shipped them back up to Colorado. When they arrived, and her ranch manager that she just hired came down to see the cattle she had bought, he refused to unload them because he also thought they would die because of their, the intention of them would be in an arid environment, not in a, Colorado winter in the 1950s. And so she fired him because he refused to unload them. And she, with the help of her two young sons, unloaded her first group of cattle. And that was really the beginning of a long story, a long history that she established of really defying the odds with the cattle. She established them in the Rocky Mountains. She created the Santa Gertrudis Rocky Mountain group of the Santa Gertrudis cattle. She introduced them to the National Western Stock Show after being initially turned away from the stock show. She won a number of classes in the stock show, eventually became a board member, and really gave the breed its prominence in the West. And then started exporting the cattle. So she sent cattle to Australia and Vietnam and other places across the country. And so she really embraced the breed and believed in it. It was really one of the strongest advocates for spreading it across the United States and other parts of the world.
Holmes discusses how Tweet Kimball protected the land.
Interesting part of Tweet's story, and really it's probably one of the greatest parts of her legacy, is she worked in 1996 with Douglas County, which is the county where this property is located, and established the first ever conservation easement. And so she basically took the land and sold the development rights to the county so it could never be developed upon. And then had an agreement, a written agreement, to develop what we call envelopes, areas where we as a foundation can build for the purpose of furthering our mission. But beyond that, there's no other development that's allowed on the property. So what that means is in the future, no fear that it's going to become a subdivision of houses or high-density retail, development, or a golf course. I mean, all the things we see happening all around us. Tweet protected the 3,400 acres that we have here by establishing those easements. The conservation easement program has become so successful in Douglas County. There's now a number of ranches that the county's purchased through conservation. And Tweet was the first one to do it here. And so it's really an important part of what she's established. And so for us, it gives us a tool to be able to protect the conservation values on the land through this legal agreement we have with the county.
Holmes lets us know about the wildlife on the property.
It's a very important part of what we do. So we have multiple species here. So the most predominant one is the elk. We have a very strong elk herd. And with all the development that's gone on between here and the Pike National Forest, which is where our elk migrate from, they end up spending a lot of time on the ranch. If you go back 2 decades, they were here several months of the year, but certainly not the predominant number of months of the year. Now they're here almost year-round. So it's a very important part of what we do is really monitor and manage the elk herd that's here. We have a really small presence of deer for some reason. Haven't been able to figure out why that is. Black bear, which are seen fairly frequently on the ranch. We've caught mountain lions on our trail cams before, so we know when mountain lions are present here. Bobcats, we had a fox sighting a couple weeks ago here. Every imaginable raptor that is, native to this area. So we have brown eagles, we have hawks of all types, coyotes on the property. And so it's a very thriving, ecosystem of wildlife. What we try to do here is just stay out of the way. So we limit the areas that people can travel and visit onto the ranch itself, to try to leave most areas undisturbed. And then we try to build some programming around being able to have opportunities to see the elk during the rut season. And that's very popular. But other than that, our mission really is to try to let the elk and the other wildlife just thrive here without us being involved, either trying to overmanage their presence or exploit their presence, by trying to be too present where they are.
Holmes discusses Tweet purchasing homesteaders' properties.
So Fred Flowers was the original homesteader here. He was a potato farmer. And he established his homestead here in the late 1800s. And so when Tweet purchased the property, she also bought the flower property and a lot of other surrounding properties. She had built up quite a few thousand acres adjacent to Cherokee. I mean, we were somewhere close to 6,000 acres of contiguous land. Some of that she sold, during the later years of her life, and brought us back down to around 3,000. We're at 3,400 acres is our total right now. But there's not a lot known about the Flowers other than they lived there. He was a potato farmer. He was one of the first in this area, to establish a homestead. And there's a really famous cabin down the road on something that used to be called the Pretty Women Ranch. And this is a territorial road, Daniels Park is. And so there used to be a lot of transport going on along this area. So Fred Flowers was trying to sell his potatoes and doing what he could to kind of make his living here, and utilizing, I think, some of the traffic as a stop at the Pretty Woman Ranch, which has been really heavily documented in history of the West.
Holmes talks about more properties.
Yeah, the Blunt family is interesting. The homestead is interesting because originally it was actually on Plum Creek. And due to some continual flooding issues, at some point in time it got moved from Plum Creek physically onto the Cherokee Ranch property. And the house still stands. It's where our ranch headquarters is now. And it's one of the projects that we're hoping in the future to be able to renovate. It's right now just empty. We're not utilizing it for any particular purpose. And there's not much known about, to us here about Mr. Blunt. I think he has quite a reputation, or there's a lot of knowledge about him in Sedalia history, the area, the town that's below us. But somehow we ended up, inheriting this house that, does have some historical significance, and hopefully one day we'll be able to restore it back to its glory.
Holmes discusses Tweet's collections, including rare books.
The Shakespeare folio is probably the rarest of the books that Tweet collected. Personally, I love the Churchill collection because, I think the story, Winston Churchill's story as a prime minister during the Second World War, and how that dovetails into Tweet's story as the wife of a diplomat in England during the Second World War is really interesting. She and her husband lived there for about 7 years. He was in the Foreign Service, which essentially would be like the CIA of today. And so they had a lot of interaction with people in the government as well as in the royal family when they lived in England. And in one of the other rooms, there's a picture of Princess Anne that was taken here at Cherokee Ranch when Tweet invited her in 1984 to come and visit her in her castle, which I always think is a very audacious thing. If you can imagine Tweet Kemble sitting in her sitting room or up in her library, penning a letter to Princess Anne, dating it and originating it from her castle here at Cherokee Ranch and sending it to Windsor Castle. I just think that, in my mind, for Tweet to think of that and to have the audacity almost to do that, and then to have Princess Anne actually accept her invitation and come here, I think is really amazing. But she got to know a number of the royals, and the reason that her and Princess Anne became close is because Princess Anne's a real horse lover. She's an equestrian herself. She had actually competed in the Olympics. And Tweet had spent her lifetime riding horses and was really, even before cattle, she was in love with horses. And so they really connected on that level.
Next, Holmes honors some of Tweet's best qualities, like her ability to never give up and her perseverance.
Set a goal that something like this would remain in perpetuity. So in my world, I think I take that to mean forever, that she had this long-range vision. And to go to the county and establish this and be willing to pledge all of her assets into this idea, you have to have a lot of faith that people will come along after you're gone and they'll uphold your mission, that they'll care about, what you cared about, that they will follow. Tweet wrote a covenant. It's all in typewritten pages, in her own words, what she thought or envisioned to be the agreement, the bargain that she was making with the future. And we try to utilize that covenant as our roadmap to try to fulfill her objectives. But she had to have faith that people would come along, people would want to work here, and people would actually care about what she wanted, and that people would do whatever they could to actually see that it's a perpetual body of work, that we're just continuing to try to tell Tweet's story, follow the things that she wanted us to follow, care for the things she cared about, and to do our best to, kind of spin the wheel for the next decade or two. And then other people will come along and hopefully they'll have the same, commitment to Tweet's vision and goal. But I think it takes a lot of faith to do that, to believe that that's going to happen. And when you leave the property, you'll notice there's a structure on a hill as you're pulling away from the castle. And it looks like a big gate. There's a big gate there. And that's actually Tweet's resting place. She's buried there under a piece of petrified wood. She designed that. She placed it there and she designed it and contracted it to be built before her death in 1999. And I believe that she did that as a way of remaining forever present here at Cherokee Ranch. And I think her memorial, basically facing the castle, means that if we choose to, we can believe that somehow she's watching over what we're doing. And when the decisions get to be tough, or when, we come up against some challenge or obstacle, that we can kind of lean into Tweet's spirit of that fortitude and that lack of willingness to give up or to say no, and to carry on, carry on with whatever the goal or the objective is until the goal or objective has been met. And I think that's probably the greatest gift Tweet has given to anybody that's involved with Cherokee Ranch, is the ability to kind of, lean into that type of thinking and to carry on the good work that we're doing here.
For Treasure Expeditions, I'm Terri Saunders.